Well, to discuss the Facebook response to the Australian legislation and what might happen here in Canada is Kevin Chan. He is the head of public policy in Canada for Facebook. Mr. Chan, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me, Michael.
Now, I don't have to tell you, Facebook is drawing criticism from right around the world right now for blocking Australian users from sharing and viewing news on the platform. And again, Facebook is now negotiating with the Australian government. But as to that plan to block Australian users from sharing and viewing, why was that move even made?
Well, look, let me start by saying it is really something that is, as we've said elsewhere, not our first choice. This is really the last choice for us. Effectively, the challenge is the proposal in Australia would require Facebook to pay for something that we can't control, in the sense that we don't ask people to share news onto websites. It is publishers, news publishers, who voluntarily put things on Facebook. And you can see how, if we aren't able to have any kind of control over how much publishers share, then we actually don't control what kind of price we would pay. And so the way the proposal works doesn't actually respect basic facts about how things get shared on Facebook. It kind of ignores the realities of the internet, and it's not sustainable for us to be able to enter into that kind of framework. And I don't think, quite frankly, any organization would be able to.
And yet, and you're right, Facebook is not going through this alone. Google, though making threats early on, they do face similar regulations, and they entered into negotiations without initiating the kind of extreme response that Facebook did in Australia. How do you respond to the allegations that Facebook is essentially proving itself to be a corporate bully?
Oh, I don't see that at all. In fact, if you look at the actual legislation, it actually says very much that. It says either you pay for the news that others put on your site, or the other option is not to have news on your site. In fact, that is what's prescribed in the legislation. So I would just respectfully disagree. I think your interpretation is perhaps not the right one.
You did not warn the 13 million Australians that they would wake up and one day it would all change.
Oh, if I recall correctly, this has been something that's been publicly shared by our colleagues in Australia since
as a possibility, the as a possibility, not with an intent date to say we're going to pull the rug out from under you.
Well, I think what we should be talking about is really why we are in this situation. It is a regrettable one, and I'm happy to share with your viewers that, again, the challenge here is that we're being asked to pay for something that we don't control. And I think that that is something that would be challenging for any organization to try to do. I'm sure if you are on Facebook, you will know that, again, it is not Facebook that puts news onto the service.
Let me jump in there, though, because on the one hand, there is the issue at hand about news being on Facebook, but there's also about whether or not a company like Facebook should actually answer to a democratically elected government like in Australia. Australia has issues with what Facebook is doing, and rather than negotiating with a democratically elected government, the rug was pulled out from under 13 million Australians.
Well, with all due respect, sir, I think as you just said at the very top of your show, there are negotiations underway.
They have resumed because a bit of the blowback, I would imagine. But take a look at this statement, because this was written by a former chief executive for Facebook in Australia and New Zealand. This is Stephen Sheeler, who says, when you vandalize 13 million citizens' news feeds as a bargaining chip, you raise the stakes. So witnessing a standoff between Australia and Facebook could be the catalyst for genuine global reform. It could be that future historians of the internet come to see this decision as the moment the world sat up and started to make serious action on making big tech accountable to society. So has your company, by pulling the plug on millions of Australians, essentially proven the point that critics have been making about Facebook?
Oh my gosh, I don't think so. You know, there are 24 million Canadians on Facebook. And in Canada, I think that we have been more than willing to work in lockstep with regulators, with Parliament, and we have this posture around the world. Now, I think what is really good about Canada, and what's really good about the way in which we think about these things, is that we do this in cooperation, and we work in partnership. And that's really kind of where we want to go in Canada. We want a better outcome,
So,
as I assume you're
because,
trying to also make the
well,
point
but
on.
I guess what I'm trying to figure out, though, because Canada has similar concerns. We have heard from the Heritage Minister that they want to follow policies similar to Australia. Would then Canada face the kind of repercussions that millions of Australians faced earlier this week if it pursues a similar policy?
Well, listen, what I heard from representatives of the government is, in fact, they want to pursue a made-in-Canada approach. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we in Canada are going to strive for a better, much better outcome. And let me share with you, we have already been investing in news in Canada for the last 4 years. We've invested $10 million in the last 4 years. That consists of things like the News Fellows program with the Canadian Press, where we've created net new jobs in 2020 for journalism. That also includes business partnerships for distribution, like we have with the CBC. In 2021, in Canada, because this is a favorable place and with favorable market frameworks for internet companies, what we want to do is additional investment. And let me share with you what these things could look like. They look like news licensing. They look like additional business partnerships on distribution, like the one that Facebook has with CBC. And it looks like things like the News Fellows program we have with Canadian Press, where Facebook is creating net new journalism positions to support local news reporting. These are things that we obviously can't do alone. We need to work in partnership with the broader ecosystem, just as we're working in partnership with the CBC, but we look forward to having those positive and constructive conversations.
So is what Facebook did in Australia regrettable?
I think that it is unfortunate for everybody involved.
Will Facebook answer to a democratically elected government as opposed to trying to flex its muscle as it did in Australia on Tuesday?
Well, I would not characterize it that way. I would characterize it as a response to a proposal that doesn't reflect reality. It's not based on evidence. We are fortunate in Canada that we have political parties, we have a parliament, and we have a government that's evidence-based. And we are very pleased to work with the evidence before us to construct better partnerships, better frameworks so that we can get to a place we all want to be, quite frankly, which is to support a thriving news ecosystem in Canada.
Kevin Chan, thank you for that. Appreciate the time.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's Kevin Chan, Head of Public Policy in Canada for Facebook.